Hi, Helen, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
Hi, Anna. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. Today, we are going to hear about your journey from having your first baby with IVF to secondary infertility for a while with some baby losses. And then we're going to dive on into you conceiving naturally and having a really amazing natural hospital experience birthing your baby on the Gold Coast in Australia, not too far away from where I
That's
used to live in
right.
Byron. So, yes, please start from the beginning. Share with us, about that IVF journey and having your first baba and secondary infertility. I think it's really interesting to cover that as well before we dive on into this birth story.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to. So I met my partner a little bit later in life. So I was 38 when I met him, and we knew that we wanted to have a baby together very, very quickly. So we started trying to conceive within about 3 months of meeting.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, it all happened quite fast. And you know.
Love
He
that.
had a he
Yes.
had a daughter already to a previous marriage, and I'd been married before, and so we're like, let's just jump in and do this. And so we started trying about the May and it wasn't happening. So I was tracking my cycle and I wasn't ovulating. So
Mm.
I just, the temperature just didn't go up. And I was like, what's going on? My cycle length was over 100 days. So we went to see a fertility specialist and did ovulation inductions. I think we did about 3 cycles of those and they were unsuccessful. I was in a pretty high pressure job at the time and it was very stressful and I was commuting a lot and it wasn't right. I knew that my body was in this heightened state of stress. So we
Yeah.
decided that I'd stop working. I actually gave up my career in order to get pregnant. So
Mm.
we did that, and we actually conceived naturally in the March of 2019. I was so excited. I thought this is great. But sadly, that resulted in an very early miscarriage. By that stage, we had been speaking to another fertility doctor. So we had initially been working in Brisbane, which is about an hour's north from us. And then we moved down to the Gold Coast and used a fertility specialist down here. So when we lost that pregnancy, I was devastated, but we just went, okay, well, let's just do the IVF that we planned to do anyway. Straight away. Didn't really even miss a beat on that one. We did an egg retrieval and was really successful. We got 14 embryos. So it's like, oh,
Whoa.
well, this is great. We've got a
Wow.
soccer team waiting for us.
That is a lot. That's a
It was a
lot.
lot. And and yeah, it was a lot. And we transferred the first embryo on my 39th birthday. It was exactly that day. And that resulted in a successful pregnancy. So we
Wow.
were really lucky. First transfer was great. So I'm like, oh, this IVF is easy. More about that later. So I didn't work for my entire pregnancy. It was blissful. I was just relaxed and researching how I wanted to birth this baby. I had private health insurance, and so we never even considered home birth. It wasn't really on our agenda. I didn't really know anybody who had home birth. I didn't really know it was a thing. I just thought, we've got private insurance. Let's just go down that road. But I wasn't just as simple as that. I knew that I needed to choose the right birthing partner for that. So I knew it wasn't just as simple as going with who my IVF doctor was, because he was an obstetrician. I remember I interviewed him and I said, so I don't want to have a cesarean. So how do we avoid that? Let's talk about that now. And he said, oh, that was at 6 weeks pregnant or something. He just laughed at me. So the fact that he wouldn't even engage in that discussion with me, I'm like, okay, you're not going to be an obstetrician. So I then interviewed a couple of others. I decided I didn't want to birth at that hospital where we had IVF, so we moved to the Gold Coast private hospital, which is a new hospital. And to decide who I wanted it to be our OB, I went in to have a tour of the facility and I spoke to some of the midwives there and I said, so who do you think, who's the most wonderful obstetrician you have here? And they suggested the doctor that we ended up selecting, and I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to use names or not.
Well, most of the time we just kind of say doctor or midwife, really.
Yeah,
But yeah, if
yeah,
not, if
we
someone's
can do that.
curious, they can always contact you via the Instagram
Yes,
link that
they're
I'll
more than
provide.
welcome to. They're more than welcome to. So we chose our doctor who we chose. And with that birth, and I guess just, moving quite quickly to it, when did I go into labor? I went to labor at 40 and 5, 40 and 5 with with Audrey. We knew she was going to be a little girl, 40 and 5. And it started off with, and it's all starting to be a bit vague now, it's 4 years ago, but it started at 40 and 5, and I think it's called the forewaters broke, rather than the hindwaters. Is that correct? So that was like a little bit of water. And so I called the hospital, and they said, come on in and let's do some monitoring. So they did the continuous fetal monitoring and sent me home. And then something else happened again, and I went, we went into the hospital again, and I can't actually recall why we went in then, but I remember going in late at night, and it was really dark, and the midwife in there had just had a smoke or something, and I remember the thing I remember the most is how she smelt, and it just smelt like smoke, and I'm like, oh, this is just yucky. So they sent us home again, and then the third time is we went in, and I was properly in labor. But that was from going from the start to the finish. I think it was about 36 hours. So we had done we had done a calm birth, hypnobirthing course. So my birth preferences, which I wrote, were very much all about hypnobirthing. It was all about the breathing and getting in the zone, and I think I just thought I was meant to be quiet. And I really didn't learn a lot. And you mentioned just before that your podcast hadn't started until about May of 2020. So this is happening in January of 2020. I needed you. I didn't know enough about what a physiological birth was. To be honest, I didn't even know what that word was. No one talked about it really. Even in the hypnobirthing class, they talk about a lot of those concepts, but it's still very focused on your breath and being in this zone. And I remember thinking when I was in labor with Audrey, I'm like, the calm birthing woman was talking in my ear with her affirmations, and I'm like, you effing don't know what it's like to give birth, clearly, because I can't get in that zone right now. I'm just not there.
Yeah.
I spent that birth really, I remember just sitting down a lot on the ball. I thought that what I was supposed to bounce around on a ball. I really don't recall standing up a lot. I remember I got into the birthing pool really quite early when I got into the hospital, and nothing really was happening. So I didn't want any vaginal checks, so I said no vaginal checks the whole way through. But it was getting to a point where it was going on for so long, and I was exhausted. That was probably the biggest reason why I think it ended up being where it did, because I was just so tired. So when my obstetrician said, how about we just see where you're going? How are you going? I went, okay, let's just do this. So she did an internal check. I don't know how far along I was, but what it did, it resulted in the waters breaking. And from there, everything kind of started to feel like it ramped up a little bit. But I was done. Like I just couldn't, in my mind, see how this was going to happen, how this baby was going to come out. So by that stage, I just said, just cut this baby out. I don't care what you do, just cut her out. I'm done.
Sounds like
She said,
you are
oh,
in
I won't do that.
transition.
It sounds like it now in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
But she then offered a vacuum, and I said, yes, please, where do I sign, essentially.
Right, yeah.
So
That's
Audrey
where
was
you need that, supportive birth worker that's like, you're in transition,
That's
you're
right.
so close, you can do this, and not someone
That's
that's really
right.
happy to intervene, which, is the job of the obstetrician. They don't
That's right.
generally do the supporting, they do the cutting or the extraction or the
That's right.
surgery or whatever needs to happen, yeah.
And in our system, I had any midwife that was there at the time, and the midwife who we did have was I had said specifically in our birth plan, please be hands off, please don't talk to me, all of the things that kind of a
Mhm.
hypnobirthing says to do. In hindsight, now knowing myself a lot better and now knowing birth, I actually needed to be nurtured a little bit. I needed some gentle
Yes.
suggestions. I said, you can do this. You are doing this. The
Mhm.
baby's close. All of those kind of nurturing things I needed. My partner didn't have those tools. He didn't have those words. He was
Yeah.
great within his realms of his experience and knowledge and what he could do, but I just needed that. I
Yeah,
needed a
we need
doula.
that. We need that.
Mm,
Of course, women have
mm,
always birthed with other women. That's been forever. And I just think that we all need that loving, feminine, nurturing support as we're birthing.
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. So I accepted the vacuum, and she came out head first, little cone head. And I had zero tearing. I had no grazing. I
Mm.
felt very grateful and still feel very grateful for that. And I had a physiological third stage. So I had no medication at all, no drugs, no pain relief, no nothing for that birth at all. And then we
Beautiful.
stayed in the private hospital for 4 nights, and it was just like staying in a hotel. It was just, we were really cared for. It was really lovely. I really enjoyed that experience.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Lovely. And then you went on, and did you know pretty quickly you wanted a second baby?
Yes, we knew that we wanted to have a second baby. Well, we had 13 more embryos. We were going to have a whole minivan worth of babies. That was the plan. And so, yes, we did. So when Audrey was 1, we were still breastfeeding, and we decided, though, to go back and transfer another embryo. So we did that very quickly. And again, first time it worked. And we were thrilled. This IVF is so easy. Sadly, that resulted in a loss in about 10 weeks.
Mm.
I was away on holiday, and something felt different. And
Mm.
I decided to go onto the local hospital, it was Noosa Hospital, and have an ultrasound just to check the baby. And they said, I'm sorry, sadly, there's no heartbeat. So that was really devastating. And that
Yeah.
really knocked me around for quite some time. Um, And then I thought, well, let's go back and try again. I then changed fertility doctors and went to a different fertility specialist. And we tested some embryos because that embryo had been found to have a trisomy issue. So we thought we'll test some embryos and we'll keep transferring. So we did. We then transferred more embryos. I kept getting pregnant. I kept having early losses.
Mm.
Changed obstetricians again. And then I had a laparoscopy, which was to investigate for endo, and which I had no symptoms, but I was found to have no endo. But then after that procedure, I kept transferring embryos, but they kept resulting in no pregnancies.
Mm.
So that this was a course of a couple of years. Really, it was really traumatic. It was very, very upsetting.
Yeah.
I think it was in the end, I had six miscarriages, 3 procedures, so 3 operations, including another egg retrieval, because we used all of our embryos. So we had 14 embryos, and we tested a number of them, and then we transferred all the rest, and they didn't result in a live birth. So we needed to have another egg retrieval.
Mm.
So we were preparing again. This was what are we up to? May of last year, so May 2023.
Mm.
Oh, sorry, prior to that, actually, because I was really looking for answers, because I was like, why is this happening? I can't go from having all of these embryos actually implanting to having
Mm.
no embryos implanting. What's shifted? And I'm an insatiable learner, and I always listen to podcasts. So I researched, my infertility. I was like, what's going on? And I found out about infections in your uterus through a company in Greece called Fertilysys. I collected and sent off my menstrual blood, and it came back with a very thorough testing that said that I had infections that were resulting in the failure to implant.
Mm.
So it was a
Amazing
really
key of information for anyone who's trying.
massive, and apparently a major cause for secondary infertility. I'm sure for first initial infertility as well, but
Of
particularly for
course.
secondary infertility because of the interventions that we face during our births. But in my case, it was I believe, through the laparoscopy.
Mm.
So I did a round of antibiotics. My partner did as well, because otherwise you're just essentially transferring the bacteria back and forth. So
Yeah.
we did that. And then I thought, well, we'll just use the embryos that we have still. So by that stage, we did another embryo transfer with a double embryo, so twins, and resulted in a pregnancy, but again, an early loss. But from there, I thought, okay, there's something still in this. So, but we were all ready to do IVF again. But I did everything. I was researching everything. I got help from different naturopaths, fertility experts at all over Instagram. I took a naturopathic medication. I took pharmaceutical medications, metformin, because I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I really tried pretty much everything I could think about, and I really directed that course myself. So I thankfully was with a doctor who was supportive of me doing whatever it took. I think he was kind of a bit like, well, this woman's over 40 now. What are her chances? Let's just let her do whatever she wants to do. She's going to pay for it anyway. So we were due to do another round of IVF through a different doctor again. That was going to be my 5th IVF doctor. So I chopped around a bit. And we were due to do that egg retrieval in May, but my ovulation was delayed, which at the time was so upsetting for me because I was tracking everything. I was doing everything to keep my ovulation in the right time frame. I used about 3 different tracking devices. So I was devastated at the time. I felt depressed, to be honest, and I was really very, very low. So when I ovulated too late to do the egg retrieval before our holidays, I was just like, okay, well, this is over. But I ovulated and I said to my partner, I remember exactly where I'm like, get upstairs now.
We're doing it the old-fashioned way.
we're going to give this a red hot go. And sure enough, it worked.
Wow.
And I remember I was about 16 days late, and it just didn't really even occur to me that I was going to be pregnant, because it was more like, oh, let's just prepare for this holiday. It was our first holiday post-COVID, first one as a family with Audrey, and we were going overseas. So I thought, let's just enjoy this. And sure enough, I was pregnant. So that was extremely exciting, very terrifying. I won't lie. It was terrifying. I couldn't really believe that I was pregnant, and this baby was going to stay, because my history had told me that it wasn't going to stick.
Yeah.
So I tried to be positive and believe and think it was all going to be fine, but it was pretty hard. So it was hard for me to start planning our birth, because it felt like it wasn't 9 months away. It was kind of like eternity away, because how was this baby going to be here when I'd lost so many babies? So between having Audrey in the hospital and being pregnant this time, I had booked in 2 home birth midwives, because I really wanted to have a home birth. I didn't want to have a hospital birth during COVID. But I had to cancel that home birth midwife so many times, so I couldn't really bring myself to book another one until I'd had the 13-week scan. And by the time I went to call to book her, she wasn't available, and others weren't available. And that was really tricky for me. The other thing is, the one who was available, I asked her what the transfer rate to hospital was, and it was circa 20%. It was a really high transfer rate, and that concerned me, because I thought, well, if I'm going to all this work to have a home birth, and cost, because it is a costly decision where I live in Queensland, it would have been about $6,000, something like that, to have a home birth. I thought, well, I don't want to get transferred. And if I am going to get transferred, the transfer would be to the local public hospital, which, to be honest, I had not heard great birthing stories from. Actually, I'd heard, quite terrifying birthing stories. So that really wasn't what I wanted to do. And we still had private health insurance. We had such a positive experience with our obstetrician the first time. Yes, it was a vacuum delivery, but I fully believed that she would trust in what I wanted to do, and I could influence the way that birth was going to go with her, without kind of being overruled. And I wouldn't allow that anyway. So for this birth, we decided a number of reasons. So it was also, Audrey was 4 years old now. We weren't breastfeeding anymore, and she was really, I guess, clingy. And I knew that she wouldn't let me have the space to birth the baby the way that I felt that I really needed to get in the zone. And I also knew that after having the baby, we really didn't have the support network for somebody to wrap me up into a little cocoon and let me just be with my baby, which, having listened to your podcast and others of these beautiful home births, oh, they sounded just magical. And the village of people who came to look after this woman and this new baby and their family, oh, it was like a beautiful. I just didn't have that. And I was very cognizant of this in my decision making.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to put that level of pressure on my partner to be absolutely everything and everybody to all of us. It just would have been too typical.
Yeah.
So we decided to go back and have this baby in the private system again, rather than having the home birth,
Yeah.
which was a massive decision. It really was. And I went back to my obstetrician. I essentially interviewed her again and said, let's really talk about this.
Mm.
For my first birth, I had prepared by doing hypnobirthing, and that was really my focus. And I thought I was going to have this beautiful Zen hypnobirthing. But whilst I was pregnant, I found you. And to be honest, you are completely the reason we had the birth that we did. Your podcasts and the stories and the wisdom of these, you said, I think you've had 200 episodes. I would have listened to 150 of them. Like, I just was in my ear constantly, no matter what I was doing all day, I would constantly be listening to a podcast from you. And I truly believe that repetition, it wasn't just hearing one story. It wasn't as simple as just doing one course in a weekend and moving away and went, okay, great, I know what I'm doing here. Not at all. It was listening to your podcast. It was listening to Dr. Rachel Reed on the Midwife's Cauldron. And another, the Great Birth Rebellion, was wonderful. And listening to learning about, okay, what is strep B? I knew about strep B from the first pregnancy, so that was probably not as a really great example, but maybe the continuous fetal monitoring, which I had said yes to with Audrey's birth. I now knew that, okay, what's the implications of having that? You know, is it evidence-based? No, it's not evidence-based. So why would I be accepting this? And then it can change the course of my birth. So I really, really knew, like, I knew that I didn't want to have that. I knew that I didn't want to have any vaginal checks, but I knew why I didn't want to. So I think it's one thing to know the concept. I think it's another thing entirely to go, okay, if you do, this is what you're saying yes to or opening yourself up to, and that can change the course of your birth materially. So that was really major for me. Listening to your podcasts, reading books about birth, I just completely immersed myself in the whole experience.
Beautiful. Love that so much. And it really is, the knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And also what I love, that you recognize it's something also that repetition, that deep that deep rewiring of your subconscious mind. I mean, that is truly what listening to stories does for us. It becomes that integrated wisdom.
And I think that we don't, well, certainly in my circle, I didn't have many examples of natural birth. And when I did speak to people, everyone shared their story, but it was always really negative. So I really needed to immerse myself with positive natural birth stories. There's another podcast in Australia that's very, very popular, at which I listened to for my first pregnancy, but I found an overwhelming number of them were negative stories. They were what can go wrong in birth. And I think that's used as a platform to make everyone feel very included.
Yeah.
But I don't think that leads to physiological birth. I don't think it informs and educates at all. I think it makes us women fearful.
That's true. Yeah. It really is. I mean, I think it's definitely beautiful that there is a platform like that, and there's plenty of those out there, aren't they? And that is why I'm trying to keep this one very much so in this niche, because it's used as a resource and tool for those who really want to optimize their chances of having that physiological, natural, empowering, positive birth experience. And it is so powerful, what we suggest for our mind. And that it is a suggestion. Everything you listen to, you watch, you read, it's a suggestion that your mind goes like, okay, I'm taking that in, I'm taking that in, I'm taking that in.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. So you chose to go back to the same obstetrician
Hmm.
and yeah, take us back to then that journey.
Okay. So the first signs of labor were I was 39 and 4. No, it must have been a bit earlier than that. So I lost my mucus plug on the Thursday. She was born on the Sunday. So I was about 39 and 2 when I lost the mucus plug in the morning. Went, okay, something's happening. That's exciting. But was also aware through listening to podcasts that I could lose the mucus plug and it could regrow back again as well. So is that correct? I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah, that's
So
correct.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So that I wasn't like thinking it was going to be imminent. So that was a Thursday. And then on the Saturday morning, I walked a 5 kilometer park run, which is a park run is a walking event that's all over the world, really. It's just a free Saturday morning event. And I've been doing it for the last 6 weeks. And my very heavily pregnant body was the last one to cross the finish line. But I walked 5 kilometers in Queensland summer heat. It was pretty hot.
That's impressive.
It was great. It worked.
Mhm.
I went home and then went to have a pregnancy massage. I went and had acupuncture, and I had actually no acupuncture that entire pregnancy. Whereas with Audrey, I'd had acupuncture then religiously the whole time. But I just didn't feel called to, and it's vastly different organizing appointments when you have a 3-year-old than when you're not working and no kids. You could have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
I also had that Saturday afternoon, I also had a really big fight with my partner. So so I had this big emotional like let go. It was about, in hindsight, it was probably about something that wasn't really very important at all. I just felt like I needed him to be a little bit more supportive when it came to birthing. And it was just massive, big crying fit. As soon as that happened,
Mm.
I went into labor. So as soon as that was over and we'd kind of kissed and made up, and he went, okay, yeah, cool, we're fine. I had a bloody show, and that was in the afternoon. And I started having what I thought at the time, I didn't know if it was contractions. It just felt like kind of pregnancy, period pains. Now, I had decided from the first birth that what was really lacking was I needed that woman's support for our second birth. So we had chosen our obstetrician, and we knew that when we got to the hospital, we would be given a midwives, whoever was on roster. So I actually had also decided to have a doula. And during the course of that pregnancy, I interviewed a few doulas, and didn't really connect with anybody. A couple of them were just brand new doulas, and they'd only attended a couple of births. So they were really enthusiastic, but I just felt like I wanted somebody with more experience. I interviewed somebody else who had a lot of experience, but we actually didn't connect on a values point of view. We had kind of vastly different belief systems about some things. And I just thought, shit's probably not going to gel in my most vulnerable, intimate time that I need someone to be on the same page as me.
Yeah.
So I have a very dear friend who I actually met when I was pregnant. She was also pregnant with her first. And she ended up for her first having an accidental home birth, and then for her second having an on purpose home birth. And then she attended 2 births of friends of hers. And she's just this beautiful energy. She's a breathwork coach. She's a personal trainer. She's just this incredible human who, when you're with her, you just feel like everything's about you and this connection that you have together. She's great like that. So I asked her to be our doula, and she accepted and was delighted. So that was fabulous news. So
Wow.
I went I went into labor. I messaged her and I said, I think this is happening. How are you going? She's got 2 kids. How are they all organized? Like that was a big part of it for me, was making sure that Audrey, my daughter, was organized, and that Paula, her daughter and son were organized as well. So that was all fine. Once everyone had made that clear that this is fine, we're safe, their children are taken care of, this is about you. She messaged and we're like, she's all set to go. So that was in the afternoon. I said to her, I'm going to get some sleep. And that was at about 10 o'clock at night time. I turned my phone off and said I was going to go to sleep. I think I lasted about 45 minutes before the contractions woke me. I had 3 contractions lying in bed. Wasn't really lying, actually. I couldn't lie down. So I got on all fours and contracted in bed and went, okay, this is not going to work. I'm not going to go to sleep. And so I got up and went downstairs, and I didn't wake my partner, whereas the previous birth, which was 36 hours, I'd woken him. And he even said tonight, I said, what do you remember from the birth? And he said, for the first one, I just remember being so tired. And I'm like, oh, you were tired. Good. Great. Yeah. So was I. And so I left him sleeping and I labored by myself. And the contractions were about 10 minutes apart for most of the night. I used an app called Freya, which I actually learned about through one of the women on your podcast. And that was wonderful. It had affirmations that talked me through at that stage of the birthing and the labor. I was really needing those affirmations, and the timing felt really important to me. Some people don't like to track, but for me, I felt it. I felt more in control, knowing where I was within the contractions. With Audrey's birth, I'd also timed contractions, but they never really got very close together. And even right up until the end, I didn't contract in that traditional kind of time frame. So this time I really wanted to be clear of what was happening. So I tracked those. About 4 a.m, I thought I need to try and get some sleep. So I couldn't lie down though. So I lay over the back of the sofa, just kind of my arms over like this, and just closed my eyes and just rested for half an hour until the sun came up. By which time my partner came downstairs, and I contacted my friend Paula, who was our doula, and I said, this was 6 a.m. and I said, I think we're on. I think everybody needs to get here who's going to be here. So Paula came, Mark came downstairs, and between them it was a perfect combination, because I knew from the first birth that I didn't want to go to the hospital too early. And I definitely did that with Audrey's birth, having, I went 3 times, and even then on the 3rd time we were still too early. So this time I knew I didn't want to. So that involved us laboring at home. We have an upstairs downstairs situation. And so I was downstairs for a little bit of the morning. I was in quite the laboring, or the contractions were quite intense already from about 6 a.m. and I was really having to stop and pause and hold the side of the bench. I used a TENS machine, which I also used for the first one, but the second time I was like, wow, this is amazing. My TENS machine really felt like my drug, actually. If someone had tried to take my TENS machine off me at the time, I would have attacked them. Like, this is mine, don't take it. This is great. I loved it. And I used a birthing comb as well, but that was the only pain relief, if you wish, that we used. And Audrey was downstairs, so we decided to move upstairs. And the beautiful part about having both Mark as my partner and also Paula, who Audrey knew very, very well because their daughters were friends, is that somebody was always with Audrey and somebody was always with me. So it would take turns, really, depending on who I felt like I needed at the time. And so earlier on, it was really Mark, my partner. I wanted him with me, and Audrey was downstairs with Paula, and they were doing drawing and just generally chatting and making snacks. And then almost as things were starting to ramp up, I actually felt like I wanted Paula more. Maybe that was that female energy. She really talked me through using different positions. So we tried, mostly I was standing up and walking around. Again, that was quite different to Audrey's birth. Whereas I felt like I was sitting down a lot for Audrey's birth. I felt like I was supposed to sit on the birthing ball and bounce around. And so I think I did a lot of that. Whereas with this birth, I stood up, I walked around, I leaned on people, on Paula and on Mark, they did the compression of my back, which helped immensely. At one point, Paula got me in the shower, and I had the water going down my back, and music on really loud, and just singing and dancing, and just I just wanted to move this baby down, and crying. Like, I remember being in the shower and just crying and sobbing. And again, it was just that emotional release, I think, that I really needed throughout the labor at the same time, just to I don't know, purge and bring the baby out.
Yeah, beautiful.
At about 11 a.m., I really started to, I think I did an internal check myself.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, I can't feel a head. I can't feel anything. So we can't be that close. Because I guess I just thought that all of a sudden the head would just be there and off we go. And she would be there for a long time, actually. But no, I didn't. So I thought, okay, well, that's fine. We'll just stay at home. And we just kept laboring at home. Um, but at about 11:45, all of a sudden I had this pressure, and I really felt pressure in my bottom quite strong. And all of a sudden I was just like, okay, we're going, get in the car. There was no real time to prepare or anything like that. Thankfully everything was done, but it wasn't let's go in half an hour. It was like, no, get in the car right now. Thankfully it was a Sunday, so everyone got in the car. Paula got in the car with us as well, so the three of us went. She sat in the front seat, I sat in the back seat on all fours. We had a 15-minute drive that on any other day of the week, had it not been a Sunday, could have easily turned into a 30-minute drive plus. So it
Mm.
was a 15-minute drive to the hospital, and Mark pulled into the kind of emergency bay, and we both got out, and we walked into the hospital, and I was that pregnant woman laboring in the main reception of the hospital, roaring like a lion for two solid contractions. Everyone was running towards me. Can we get you a wheelchair? I can't. Like, no, I do not want a wheelchair. I cannot sit down. There is a baby between my legs. There's no sitting right now. So we walked upstairs, took the lift and walked upstairs to the maternity ward. We got in there at about, and I do want to just check the timing because it was all really quite close together. We left home at 5 minutes past 12, and we arrived at the hospital at 15 minutes later at 12:20. We got into maternity, about 5 minutes it took to walk up there. And then I was in the bathroom at the maternity ward. I walked in and I just kind of was really unceremonious. I'm like, I'm here. Took all of my clothes off. I was completely naked. I said, I want to go to the bathroom. And the moment I stepped into the bathroom, my waters just broke everywhere. It was like a kid's water balloon had just been, someone had scrunched it and it just sprayed over the entire room. And that was one contraction. And then I said, I'm getting in the bath, which we'd called ahead. And so they'd started filling the bath, which I was really grateful for. I got in the bath. I was in the bath for 5 minutes. And then my greatest wish with this birth, through learning through your podcast, was that there would be, I'd have the fetal ejection reflex. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know that was a thing for Audrey's birth. So it wasn't something I was waiting for. But this time, that was it. I was having the fetal ejection. And so that's what happened. I got in the bath. I didn't push. My body did everything for me, and just boom, her head came out. And there was no one else in the room. It was just Mark and the doula. No midwives were in the room. Our OB didn't make it even for any of the birth. So it was just us. Mark likes to say that he completely birthed our baby. He's the daddy doula now. He can like consult. So her head was out, and then everyone's shouting, "Her head's out! Do you know? Do you know you've got a head between your legs?" I'm like, I know. I just can't talk to you right now.
Of course you know. You're the birthing mother. Of course you know that you have a head in
Like,
between.
yeah, I just can't. I can't speak right now. We need to just. You need to just be quiet for a little bit. So that was, and then the very next contraction. Actually, by that stage, the midwives ran in, and they're like, move back in the pool, because I was sitting quite close to the front of the pool. And thankfully they got me to move back, which at the time I didn't understand. But then I had one more contraction, and the baby, she shot out like a tornado, like a torpedo is probably a better way of saying it. She just absolutely flew out, and had I not moved back, she would have smacked her head into the side of that birthing pool, which is one of those solid ones. It's not a blow up pool.
Oh, yeah.
So thankfully they got me to move back. And it was just the most incredible experience. It was everything I'd hoped it would be. It was intense, there's no question, and I've got it on video, where I said, I am so glad that's over. It was a lot, but it was everything I wanted it to be. It was just perfect. and it was quick. And I had zero tearing again. No tearing, no grazing, nothing.
Mm, beautiful. And
Mm.
so did you catch your own baby, or did someone catch that torpedo that was shooting out?
Daddy did. Daddy caught
Yeah.
her. Daddy caught her. Yeah, he did. And he prides himself. He said, make sure you tell Anna that I caught the baby. It's okay, darling. Yeah,
Beautiful. And then she came up to your chest, or did you stay in the bath
did.
for a while?
Well, I wanted to stay in the bath a lot longer. So what I found out was the bath didn't have enough water in it. So when I was birthing her and her head was out, the midwives were saying, keep down in order to keep her head
Yeah.
completely submerged. But there wasn't enough water. And I thought it was because we had arrived at the hospital without it, not enough time, although we'd called ahead and they'd filled the bath. It turns out my partner had come in after parking the car. He was only a few minutes behind us, but he'd said to the midwives, "I'll turn the bath off because that'll be too noisy for her."
Oh,
Because he was thinking of me and thinking that I wouldn't want the sound.
oh,
So which is
bless.
a little it's bless him, but it was a little bit disappointing afterwards because I would have liked to have stayed in the bath a lot longer, but I really didn't have enough water covering me or the baby to keep us warm and comfortable.
Right.
To be fair, I was in the bath for such a short amount of time before the baby was actually born. I didn't even get that feeling of when you get into the bath, which I was really hoping to get, but I think it all happened so fast anyway.
Yeah. It all
So I
happened
decided
perfectly.
it happened perfectly. So we stayed in for a little bit and I held her and we started feeding and it was beautiful, but it was actually a little uncomfortable. It's a big, it's a hard bath. It's not
Yeah.
soft and squishy or anything. So I was actually really happy to get out and they brought one of the stretcher beds over. And I jumped on there and I held my baby. And within our birth plan, I was really cognizant of the fact we're having hospital birth. I wanted to control the environment.
Mm.
So prior to giving birth, I'd gone back into the hospital to familiarize myself with the space. I knew what the lighting was going to be like. I knew what the bed was going to be able to do. Not that I even needed to get onto the bed to labor, and it turns out. So I knew all those things. And I also said I didn't want any latex gloves touching my baby. I didn't want my baby to be rubbed, all of these things.
Mm.
So they were really clear, and I was clear on that. So the only person who touched my baby was me and Daddy for the whole time we were in the hospital. Um, so we jumped on the bed, and by that stage the obstetrician arrived because she hadn't been there for the birth. We had a midwife who was with us for maybe 15 minutes. And I just held my beautiful baby and we just connected and it was just gorgeous and we started breastfeeding. And there was no pressure to birth the placenta at all. The only thing I would have done a little differently in hindsight was the placenta didn't come immediately. I think it was about 40 minutes later. And so I was offered to get off and go to the toilet to birth.
Mm.
And I said, okay. The obstetrician just said, or I could just have a quick look and give it a little, tug and you do one push if let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, well, let's try that first so I don't have to disturb myself or the baby. So we
Mm.
just did that and it was just popped out. It wasn't
Beautiful.
challenging at all.
Mm.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. So we just had this beautiful golden hour, which ended up being, I think we were in the birthing suite after the birth for 2 full hours, completely undisturbed. There was no artificial light on us at all. It was just beautiful natural
Mm.
light coming into the space. It was
Beautiful.
just and they were really excited actually. The energy in the room felt really positive.
Mm.
Um, they'd selected a midwife for us who I knew, and she was supportive of physiological birth, and she was pumped. She was pumped to have been at our birth as well. And everyone, came and talked to us about it afterwards, and it was really exciting.
Yeah, because usually in the private hospitals where the obstetricians, you have a private obstetrician, usually you don't see a lot of natural physiological births. So they would be really pumped. It would be like the unicorn
Yeah.
is here, birthing without any assistance of any kind, right? So
Yeah.
you would have been a little unicorn for them that day. And that's what also happens with physiological birth. Like there's this oxytocin high for everyone in the room, not just the
Mm,
mother. Like we all feel it. And that's the amazing thing. So what a beautiful blessing for everyone involved, to witness a physiological
yeah.
birth. It really is. It's such magic and so healing, and it's just everything. It's absolutely everything.
Yeah. I felt really proud. I still feel very proud. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that's the thing too. Like I love these stories that, there, if you are, you're really good at finding the right care provider, like you did, you interviewed
Mm,
plenty and you knew what you were looking for. You're a very strong woman. You really did your research and you made sure that the ones who were caring for you would adhere to that and listen to that. Then you can have a really beautiful, empowering birth in the hospital,
absolutely.
even with an obstetrician who's, that's not their
Yes,
forte. Yeah.
absolutely. I felt really, um, really positive about that. I really knew I could do that. I felt really confident in advocating for myself. I felt like our team was the right team. And I would have changed it at any moment had I not believed that.
Good.
I
Yeah.
really would have. I
Yeah.
would have gone into a home birth situation very quickly. I would have got a private midwife. I was willing to do whatever it took
Hmm.
to achieve the physiological birth that I knew that I needed to have, because I knew this was going to be our last baby, and I knew that it was a healing birth because I had gone through so much trauma with IVF. And it
Yeah.
was traumatic. It was really traumatic. My first birth wasn't, to me, wasn't traumatic. It was a beautiful experience, but the
Yeah.
IVF was very traumatic.
Mm.
And I needed to leave that story behind and
Yes.
close off that period with this beautiful, beautiful birth
Mm.
that was my daughter would take with her and for future generations.
Mm.
That would be their story.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming and sharing this story. Now, if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby and she really wants to have a natural, empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdom would you give to her? And let's frame it also that if she is 40 plus,
Mm,
maybe has done IVF. Because you
mm-hmm,
know what usually doctors say to a woman who says, "Oh, I want to have a natural birth," when you are 40 plus
mm,
and you are, having had an IVF pregnancy.
mm, mm. First of all, I would say is listen to your podcast.
Mm.
Listen to all of those episodes, because you can't just listen to one or two. Because even my partner said to me tonight, "So you listened to so many, were they all the same?" And I said, "Not, there was no story is ever the same. Everything is different. Every birth is different. My two births were different. Every story is different." And so I got gems from every single story that was shared. So know that, listen to podcasts like the Rachel Reed, the Midwife's Cauldron, and learn about the risks of IVF pregnancies for birth. My read on it, looking at the research, is there's no higher risk.
No,
There wasn't.
no.
Same with advanced maternal age.
Hmm.
Uh, it just was not a risk.
No.
We could look at me. I am not a statistic. I am, whether I'm my age or not, I'm young, I'm fit, I'm healthy, my mental health is strong. I didn't have gestational diabetes, I'm not obese. There's so many things. And even if I was a little bit overweight, the science also, the research doesn't even
Mm-mm.
show that to be an issue. Like I just believed in my body. Absolutely. So you need that belief as well. So
Mm-mm.
listen to these podcasts, really do the research,
Mm-mm.
and don't, if somebody's saying to you that you are high risk, it's like, oh, question that and take
Mm-hmm.
some research in. And maybe they're not your team. And we also need to remember, these people are service providers. They are providing a service to us. We do not owe them anything. Yes, respect, of course, but we don't owe them anything. So interview them. They need
Mm.
to prove themselves to us. And I
Yes.
felt really very strongly about that. And um, I had a few other gems that I wanted to know. Is I think you need to really know yourself,
Mm.
know your family, know your situation when you're choosing how you want to birth. Is get very clear on what your resources are and who you are. because what might be an excellent fit for one person, like I said earlier, like I listened to all these beautiful home birth stories, but that wasn't going to be my story because I didn't have the village surrounding
Yeah.
me who was going to allow for that nurturing. Perhaps the birth would have been fine. I'm sure, let's be honest, I almost gave birth at home anyway. Give it half an hour. I was giving birth at home. So it wasn't the birth itself that was going to be the challenge. It was going to be afterwards and really being put into this cocoon to allow me to connect with my beautiful baby and my partner, and for him not to be running around looking after us without, connecting
Yeah.
with us too. So that felt really important to me. The other thing that I really, really struck me after I gave birth is we're told as women when we're giving birth, it's almost like you can't get too ahead of yourself. So I told anybody who would listen I was going to have a natural birth. I was going to have 100% physiological birth. I told friends, I told family, I told the hospital, I told the midwives, I told everybody. And everybody said to me, well, yes, but birth doesn't always go to plan. And I get that. I'm an intelligent woman. I understand that. But it's almost like telling my analogy, it's almost like telling an elite athlete, like
Mm-hmm.
you're going for gold in the 100-meter sprint, but you need to prepare your mind to trip and fall over.
Yeah.
And I just refused to have that attitude. I said, no, that's fine. That's your story. But for me, I am having this physiological birth. I have done the work. I have done the research. I know what that looks like now by listening to all these birth stories. I'm not even going to let that come into my range. It wasn't in
Mm-hmm.
my reality at all.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully thankfully it wasn't. I had the birth I wanted to have. My belief system was strong.
Mm-hmm.
The people around me, they had that. They shared my belief system,
Yeah.
and at no time was anybody really questioning that. And my obstetrician, she sees high risk births all the time, but she never once said to me, you're advanced maternal age. She never once said to me, let's talk about induction.
Mm.
um, Everybody was on board with what I was wanting to achieve,
Yeah.
and we did it. We really did it.
I love that. And I love the analogy with the athlete because they do exactly what we are all telling you to do, which is visualize your dream scenario. They visualize winning, right? They visualize their race or whatever they're doing
Yes,
and how they're winning that. And that's what a woman should do. She should aim for the dream birth, right? Doesn't make her less intelligent, doesn't make her not realize that, yeah, sure, other things can happen. Like the athletes know that I could come second, I could come at fifth place or whatever, but I'm not aiming for that, obviously.
mm,
And it's
mm,
it's just mind-boggling to me how everyone wants to tell a woman to do that, to just expect the worst, expect it not
exactly.
to work. It's like, no, of course not.
I think it's just another example how we're taking away our power, and the impact that has on our health, and trauma with birth is just so massive, and that flows through to our future generations. It was
That's
so important to me that this story, as I said earlier,
mm,
this would be my daughter's story. It would be Margot's story of how she came
mm,
into the world, and
wow.
that I wanted to make her proud, and that mummy's an athlete.
Yes.
Failure was not an option.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute joy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.